Good afternoon to all, and welcome to what I believe would be a fascinating discussion on the global need to invest in human capital in agriculture. My name is Effie Lazaridou. I'm the CEO of New Agriculture New Generation, a non-profit organization based in Greece and established under the founding initiative and support of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. Today, I will be discussing with Brian Schilling, Director of Rutgers Cooperative Extension in New Jersey. Hi, Brian.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. It's great to have you here. So Brian, the tremendous challenge for humanity today is to provide a growing world population with healthy diets from sustainable agriculture and food systems that operate within what we call the planetary boundaries. So issues such as food security, food safety, the food supply chain remain at the forefront of public discourse. The needs are becoming even more pressing with the war in Ukraine, and of course, the critical role that the agri food sector needs to play in mitigating the climate crisis. Within this context, farmers today need to become not only producers, but also entrepreneurs and keepers of the natural environment. So, for this transition to happen, we need farmers that have solid knowledge, they are informed, they are engaged with technology, they have an understanding of the entrepreneurial and ecological implications of their endeavors. So, Brian, you are successfully leading cooperative extension at Rutgers in New Jersey, and New Jersey has more or less the same population as Greece. So, what is exactly that you're doing, and how this service has evolved lately?
Sure. Well, I'm very happy to have this discussion today, and I think your opening comments were absolutely spot on and important. I can't think of a more essential discussion to have than the security of our global food supply chains. It's the basis of civil society, and here in New Jersey, I'll tell you, the economic importance is staggering. If you look at the New Jersey economy, about 11% of our entire economy and 20% of private sector jobs are either involved with the direct production or distribution or sale or processing of food items.
Mhm.
And our role in cooperative extension is actually a historic one. So many don't fully understand or appreciate the significance of our American land grant system, which a former chancellor once described as the greatest American innovation. I'm a little biased with my agreement, but we go back to 1862, and the charge at that time was to really help extend the knowledge of universities out to the public, particularly in the areas of agriculture and the mechanic arts. So even though that was more than 150 years ago, in many ways, the urgency and the importance of the mission has only grown.
Mm.
So to share with you a little bit more from my perspective about the urgency of this discussion, here in the United States, and certainly in New Jersey, the numbers are even more stark. Fewer than 2% of our national population is directly involved with production agriculture. So famously, a number of years ago, a former United States Department of Agriculture secretary, Secretary Glickman, was in a forum where I remember vividly, he said, the US is blessed to be a food sufficient nation. We can feed our populace. But there's sort of a perverse irony here, because while we're food self-sufficient as a nation, individually, we are not. We are so many generations removed from food production that many individuals are not, in fact, food sufficient individually. So we have a lot of work that we do with commercial agriculturalists, small scale agriculturalists, in order to try to provide technical services, knowledge transfer to help them understand how, in fact, to produce food and fiber, either at small scale or large scale, which is a comment that I'll come back to.
Fantastic. So it is a fact that human capital is still very critical for agriculture today. So what are the challenges that you face in attracting new talent in agriculture in New Jersey?
That's a great question. And I'll even say that in many ways, my comments will be reflective of the national challenges as well. First off, here in the United States, and I understand from colleagues across the world really that others are facing similar challenges, we're having enormous amounts of retirements. It's just a demographic reality as one of the largest segments of our population moves to retirement. COVID has been remarkable in the sense that over the last 2 years, it's also spurred what we call here a great resignation. I think people are fundamentally rethinking what they want to do in life and are moving to other jobs. So mobility is remarkable. But I think one of the biggest challenges that we have right now is managing not only this huge number of people that are moving careers, moving out of the food system, but the challenge here getting new people in is that in many cases, the career pathways are obscured. And I'll tell you a brief story. One of the most enlightening, if not embarrassing moments of my career was about 20 years ago, where we had the leadership of the food industry in New Jersey come together for a career forum for our undergraduates here at Rutgers University. We had more industry executives come to this forum than we had students. And one of the things that we quickly started realizing is that the food system is somewhat stigmatized. In New Jersey, one of the numbers that I've had in my mind for many years is that about 1 out of every 2 young people find their first employment in the food industry, often as a 16-year-old. It is maybe stocking shelves or working in a restaurant, washing dishes, something that is basically a lower level, entry level job. And that frames in their mind and their perception what the opportunities are in the food system, despite the fact that it is one of the most logistically incredible industries in the world because of our just-in-time inventorying and food system, where people are getting what they want, when they want it, in the forms they want it. But there's this huge and seemingly invisible industry that makes that so, and young people do not see those career pathways. So I think trying to open up their eyes to these opportunities and reduce the stigma that in many cases is negative is absolutely essential.
So yeah, I mean, it's amazing how many opportunities are there for younger people. And however, we need young people with certain skills, with certain competencies. We need to, let's say, envision the farmers of the future. So in your perspective, can you describe the ideal farmer of the future, and whether we do already have the necessary support systems to nurture this development?
So those are 2 very good questions. I do think we have the support systems, and maybe we need to coordinate them better. To answer the first part of your question, obviously people coming in, let's say production agriculture, they need to have technical skills and know-how, but even that has shifted. If you look at the trends in American agricultural productivity, going back to the 1950s, let's say, more than a half a century ago, we're seeing less land, less material inputs, less labor being deployed to this industry, yet we're seeing productivity growth. It's all because of technology-driven growth and productivity. So I think the farmer of today versus tomorrow versus 20, 30, 40 years ago are going to be very different. I'm seeing as an example that farmers in the United States broadly, and New Jersey specifically, are having immense troubles trying to recruit a labor force, a workforce, to actually do many of the functions such as harvesting, planting, and so forth. So I think a farmer of the future is going to be more technologically adept. You'd be fascinated to know that I'm actually working with a colleague on a project proposal that we're waiting to hear if it's funded on the use of artificial intelligence in agriculture. Never in my career did I think I would be saying this to you. So we're looking at very advanced technologies to make smart farms, smart greenhouses. We're looking at drones for surveillance to maybe replace the need to apply chemicals to the extent that we do, because we can actually look and diagnose problems in more real time. So I think technological savvy. I think also the realities that we are undeniably facing right now here in New Jersey as a coastal state are related to climate. So how are we going to manage our resources? I heard those comments earlier when you made them in your introductory remarks. Soil and water and other natural resource conservation. But I think foremost, to put an umbrella over this, is business savvy. Everything from understanding the risk management profile to also, I'll share with you a comment that I find to be more and more relevant, is a lot of farmers grow. They're very capable producers, but what they don't have always is the end in mind. Where are we going to market this produce? And one of my extension colleagues is always giving the advice, don't market your produce, produce for the market. So I think you need to have this level of business savvy. And another one that may not be a factor that comes to the mind of many is, I think a good farmer is going to be a great communicator and an advocate to inform the public about the implications of certain technologies. We've had very animated discussions about genetic modification as an example, and the way this is either a benefit or a harm in the perception of some. One of the things also I will tell you, here in New Jersey and across the country, the United States, agriculture is a small minority of people. So being able to influence the regulatory and political environment in such a way that is favorable to agriculture instead of detrimental inadvertently by passing regulations that may have unintended consequences. So I think you need a very diverse skill set. And I heard in the earlier discussions today the critical importance of entrepreneurial talent, being able to develop alternative ag enterprises to help meet your financial objectives. I noted the Deputy Minister a moment ago speaking from a tourism perspective, which is another thing where increasingly a sizable percentage of our agricultural community in New Jersey is directly engaging with the public for purposes of selling their product, having farm-based tourism experiences, and so forth. So I think really coming in with a strong business sense is going to be essential.
It's amazing how many things we have in common, even though we are 1,000 miles apart. We also have a very how can I say, a gap in business savvy farmers. We also have issues in finding a labor workforce. These are the same things that we share, both sides of the Atlantic. You mentioned before about the stigma for young people working in the food sector. So besides that, are there any other challenges for younger people to enter this very, demanding but also inspirational sector?
Well, a lot of the farmers that I know, and I've known many farmers for many, many years, upwards of 30 years, it's a very fulfilling career. It's very deeply personal. It's often intertwined with their identity and their family life. So I think it's a wonderful industry. Coming in, there are challenges. There's entrance barriers. One obvious one here in New Jersey, where we have very industrial and very urbanized land bases, is that land is very costly and it's very fragmented. So like anywhere, getting access to land that's suitable for the crops or livestock that you wish to raise is a challenge. Increasingly, as we see the migration and the aging out, the graying, if you will, of the agricultural industry, we are really keenly concerned about the knowledge transfer to the next generation. Not just how to grow crops, but even how to manage the land as that succeeds to the next generation. Also, one of the things that I'm really struck by is, for the better part of a century, the United States has really prioritized domestic food self-sufficiency. So we have a large number of networks, from cooperative extension to agricultural or associations to federal agencies and state agencies that are here to support and provide resources to agriculturalists. So helping new people, young people coming on and understanding those systems is important. But I actually think before you talk about any of that, if you have a new or beginning or young farmer that's interested in coming into the industry, I think they actually need to understand and be able to articulate why they're doing it. And I think that might be better phrased as, what is the motivation or purpose of coming in? Is it to basically develop a livelihood? I can tell you across the country, fewer than 40% of farmers identify farming as their primary occupation. So we have a lot of people that do this as a secondary source of income, perhaps even more of a lifestyle choice. So what is the purpose of wanting to come in? And I say this very respectfully. And please don't, I hope our viewers don't take this as a negative statement, but I think a lot of people get a romantic image of what agriculture is, or in their mind should be. But again, if you're trying to operate this as a business, it's a very demanding field to go into. So really understand what those business realities will be. And then I think the question becomes, at what scale do you want to operate? Do you want to be a land extensive type of an operation, a more intensified operation? Again, what are your economic motives? And we actually are trying to overcome some of those challenges, maybe with three related types of approaches that target people at different phases of their life. The first is actually looking at student exposure to the careers and the realities of farming and food production. Here at the school that I teach at, we have an experiential learning component for our undergraduate students so that they can actually go out there and get their hands dirty, literally and figuratively. We try to encourage participation in extracurricular or co-curricular entrepreneurial and innovation activities. So we also have things like 4-H youth development that work with students as young as kindergarten all the way up through their high school years. So we really have some programs targeted to younger people. The second thing that I think is vitally important is early career development, leadership development, which is a topic that I've seen on the agenda today. And actually having people that have the ability to effectively advocate and lobby for the interests of their industry. And also in so doing, educate a very uninformed public about agriculture. Why do you do certain things? And I can't emphasize the importance of networking. Nobody can do it alone. I think the strength of leaders really lies in their network. And then thirdly, we target lifelong learning opportunities. I've seen in the presentations today acknowledgement, which I agree with, that a person that's entering the workforce today is going to have to reinvent themselves in their skill set, engage in lifelong professional development, skills diversification. It is a very different scenario from maybe a generation or two ago, where you may start in a career path and migrate within the same company. Today, we're seeing people not only changing jobs, but career paths multiple times. So it's constantly about affording them opportunities for development.
These are all great points, Brian. And, there's a challenge here in Europe as well. We see a very, let's say, alarming decline in the number both of farms and farmers in the EU. And recently there was a study published about the case of Europe in 2040, with just a fraction of the farms and the farmers being active. Even in Greece, we have more than 500,000 registered farmers, of which only 1/4 is actually full-time farmers. So we as people, we look up to leaders for us to inspire us, to show us new perspectives. So what is the future farm leader? What kind of abilities, capabilities, capacities do we look for the future farm leader?
That's a wonderful question. And I think in many ways, it spans industries. But speaking from an agricultural perspective, one of the programs that we offer here through, in partnership with some industry associations, is in fact an agricultural leadership development program. And coming in, they often, especially if they're multi-generations in farming, they have strong technical competencies. Obviously, that's a given. We need some strong technical skill set within the field that we work in. But I think increasingly important is just the strong interpersonal skills. In leadership, I always objected to the term soft skills, right? That somehow demean the fact that these things like the ability to communicate and work with different types of people effectively, understand yourself and how you deal with certain stresses. I don't think that's a soft skill at all. I think that is a critically important skill to have. And I think increasingly in a globalized food and agricultural system, these types of interpersonal skills take on a new challenge and importance, because we also need to have intercultural competence with people that we might work with in terms of supply chain or market opportunities or business development. So I think those soft skills, which we need to find a better term for that, are essential. I am a absolute believer that communication skills are vital in terms of communicating not only technically proficiently, but also in terms of workforce management, regulator and political environment dynamics, and so forth. Strategy, again, things are so evolving. I think there's a level of strategic agility that's required anymore. that not only setting a vision, but having the ability to be agile enough to modify when a pandemic comes or we have a global supply chain crisis. So I think that's really, really absolutely essential. I mentioned earlier in passing, I think having a network is important. That's one of the things that in our leadership development programs, we try to build kind of cohesion and collegiality among our emerging agricultural leaders so they can rely on each other in the future. I also will end on a few obvious things like integrity. I'm a personal believer that there's shortcuts in life that sometimes take you to some unwanted places. So I really am a big advocate that, always operate with integrity. And I would say maybe one or two things more. I was recently told by somebody said in a conversation recently, if you find yourself as being the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And I really had to think about that. And I admired the spirit of it. Surround yourself with people that are more knowledgeable, more diversified in their knowledge base, cultural bases than you are. Because again, we operate in this very complicated environment. And lastly, I tell my undergraduate students, I think personally, the most important characteristic I see in leadership is humility. You don't know everything. And don't be afraid to make a mistake and own the mistake. Put trust in other people that know more than you, have the humility to actually course correct rather than doubling down on a bad decision. And again, I think it goes back to that agility. I get the sense that the pace of business is just increasing. So I think having that agility and the ability to really make course corrections is not a sign of weakness or failure. I think it's a sign of good leadership to have the wherewithal to know that you have to pursue a different direction.
These are all amazing points, and I could go on discussing with you, Brian, for hours. I think humility is one of the points that you touched upon, and it's really great. And it's all about the servant leader, something that you mentioned the other day when we were discussing. And this is a huge concept, and I think very, let's say, relevant to the days that we live in. So I'd like to thank you very much for your contribution. We would like to thank the organizers for their invitation, the American Hellenic Chamber of Commerce, and of course Rutgers University and the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. And as a closing remark, allow me to announce that our organization, New Agriculture, New Generation, in collaboration with Rutgers, are going to launch the Agricultural Leadership Executive Program, a super intensive and demanding program for talented leaders in the agriculture and food sector. And this program will also provide huge opportunities for networking, as you mentioned, Brian, and actual experiences for leadership skills development. So we will be launching this within the following months, and this will run from September 2023 to May 2024. So we'll keep you posted. Thank you very much. Thank you, Brian. Thank you to our audience.
My pleasure. Thank you.